Good afternoon, everybody. Um, a lot of businesses, regulated as well as non-regulated, have the need to really know the identity of their customers, and that hasn't changed in the digital area or in the digital space. And there it's called electronic know your customer (eKYC). And obviously, digital identity is a key factor for eKYC. Let me iterate through some of the use cases. So first of all, financial institutions, financial services, for example, are obliged to verify their customers' identity under anti-money laundering law and counter-terrorism financing. And telecommunication services and companies are obliged to identify their customers for similar reasons. A service providing access to health data, obviously, and for obvious reasons, privacy reasons, need to make sure that only legit person see this very sensible data. And which is also increasingly important is neighborhood networks and sharing services, which see, especially the neighborhood networks, see a dramatic increase of use due to COVID-19. They really need to make sure that the other person is who this person wants to be or seems to be. So what are the options that one typically has for strongly verifying the identity of a user, of a customer? Well, in at least in the European Union, there are a lot of countries where citizens, users can use the eID functions belonging to or associated to their ID documents, or even built into the respective ID cards. This has seen quite successful use in the Baltics, for example, but isn't much used in other countries, such as Germany. And there are other ways to verify the identity, more traditional ways. So, for example, the Postal Service might offer the identification of a customer in the local branch. The obvious disadvantage is that if you are in a digital transaction, you have to suspend that transaction, print out a pile of paper, go to the post office, sign that pile of paper, show your ID card, and then the clerk of the post service will wrap that in a letter and send it to the service provider. So obviously that's has really an impact on conversion and user convenience, and that's why, for example, in Germany, all kinds of video identification and auto identification are quite successful these days. The person talks to an agent via video chat, possesses its or her identity document, it's verified, and so on. And in case of auto identification, scans of the ID documents, videos or pictures of the person are used to do the identity verification, mixing in some artificial intelligence. The challenge with this kind of method is that it's quite complex from a technology perspective. So the barrier is there for the average user, and there's also an emotional barrier because people are, and that's our experience, are reluctant to talk to a foreigner via a video chat conversation and show the ID card. So the problem is evident, and yeah, it's still not really solved. And I would like to talk about one alternative option that doesn't replace those, but could add some benefit to the mix. And this is the sharing of existing digital identities, especially those managed by financial institutions. Why is that? Why is that an option? Well, basically, as I explained previously, financial institutions are obliged to verify the identity of their customers. So they know the identity of every person that is authorized to access a bank account due to the obligation defined by the anti-money laundering law. And they maintain this data and associate this data with multi-factor authentication credentials. And those multi-factor authentication credentials, at least in the European Union, got even stronger due to the Payment Service Directive 2 that recently was put into effect. So that's a quite powerful combination. So that means every online banking user account is backed by KYC data and a pair of strong authentication credentials. That could be quite useful for third parties as well. And just to give you some numbers, according to a stat of the European Union, in 2017, there were 220 million online and mobile banking user accounts across the European Union. In the US in 2019, according to Statista, there were 190 million user accounts. And Juniper Research came up with a quite impressive number for the whole world in 2024, which is 3.6 billion user accounts. Just imagine 3.6 billion digital identities. What could we use them for in various businesses? And there is momentum behind that topic. So there are services already existing. I just picked a couple of them. So for example, in the Netherlands, there's Ident, and in Norway and Sweden, there are different flavors of bank ID. And in Germany, for example, we've got Yes, that also leverages bank KYC data. Those are local initiatives. The question is, how can we come to a global solution that really provides that reach and that valuable data to relying parties in a simple manner? And there's one initiative that really stands out. It's run by the Institute of International Finance, which is a sub-organization of the International Monetary Fund. It's the Open Digital Trust Initiative. And it aims to set out the governance and also technical standards for sharing digital identities between different institutions. And the OpenID Foundation, the standardization body specifying OpenID Connect and other identity standards or extensions to OpenID Connect, contributes to these initiatives and runs two standardization efforts, which is the eKYC and Identity Assurance Working Group and the Financial API Working Group, the latter defining a security profile, the former defining an OpenID Connect extension for strong identity assurance. We will come back to that topic later. In the European Union, there was recently an announcement that the European Union, the European Commission, will pursue a so-called European Digital Identification Initiative, which also might include a way for financial institutions to share their identity data as identity providers. This will most likely be part of the upcoming update to the eIDAS legislation. And in Germany, just as an example, there is a government-run process called Schaufenster Digitale Identität, which aims at leveraging existing digital identities for e-government and other use cases. From a technical perspective, I think that the best way to leverage this KYC data for third party is to, well, turn the bank into an IDP. So no aggregation, proxying whatsoever in between. The direct connection between two points is a line. And the line in this case is between the bank acting as an IDP and the relying party that obtains and uses the identity data. That clearly creates a challenge since there are a lot of banks. Alone in Germany, we've got more than 4,000 financial institutions. In the European Union, there are more than 6,000 financial institutions, and worldwide, we are north of 25,000 financial institutions. So this is a clear barrier for adoption, and that's one of the reasons why the concept isn't available today to this day on a global basis. But that's why I think the IIF initiative is really groundbreaking and will prepare that for success. What can we achieve if we really integrate or make the bank an IDP, and let a relying party obtain the identity data directly from the bank. Well, let's assume we are on an insurance website or in an insurance app and wanna identify. The first step would need to select the bank, because there are so many of them. The system cannot really automatically determine where to go. But once the user said, okay, I'm with, for example, a savings bank, the bank will act as an IDP, which from a user's perspective means, well, I use my online banking login. The online banking login, which I'm available or aware of, and that I use regularly to access my balance, to issue SEPA credit transfers and so on. So I use the same login. Even my mobile banking app, where I already set up my identity to log into my bank account. In our example, I just use the fingerprint to unlock my app, and then the bank asks me whether it's allowed to ship the data that the relying party requested. So you see, this is also all very privacy preserving. The relying party needs to ask for specific claims, and the user has to consent, and potentially also uses the strong customer authentication to really strongly authenticate in that process. And that's it. The data are then provided to the relying party and can be used for whatever process the relying party wants to implement. From a technical perspective, the implementation can be based on OpenID Connect. I think that's the best way to implement it today, because OpenID offers a good balance from maturity, because it's used all over the place. There are thousands of implementations available today. It's simple, it's secure, and it's suitable for web applications and app-based experiences. And with its built-in support for OAuth, it can even be used in the same flow to leverage other services like electronic signing or payment initiation within the same flow. So you could, in the same flow, agree to share your data and pay, for example, for a new iPhone. In order to cope with the challenges of higher identity assurance, OpenID Connect needs to be extended. And I'm going to explain why. So this picture again shows the prototypical architecture if we turn the IDP into the bank into an IDP. So the bank would provide the relying party with an assertion, typically an ID token, containing the user identity data. In this case, we see a user ID, an email address, name, date of birth, and address. What this assertion lacks is additional information about how did the IDP actually verify this data? How did it retain this data? Who verified the data? Using what evidence? When was it verified? How was it verified? Those are all important information if one tries to utilize the data for regulated and high assurance use cases. So for example, if the data were verified using a video identification method, the relying party, if it operates under the email law in Germany, would not be allowed to use that data. Whereas for eIDAS, same data could be used. This is just the craziness of regulation, right? But there needs to be clear transparency about all the processes and the trust frameworks that were used. And that's what OpenID Connect for identity assurance does. In the lower part of the assertion, you see the data payload, which is the given and the family name. And OpenID Connect for Identity Assurance introduces a new container that allows the IDP to provide all the information, the additional metadata that the relying party needs, namely a trust framework. In this case, anti-money laundering law, could be other laws or regulations. What documents were used, who verified that. Here in that case, it's the Postal Service using a in-person proving, and when it happened. And this is a useful extension, and we, for example, use that to provide trust service providers under eIDAS, so they can use spontaneously create qualified certificates and qualified electronic signatures. All right, let me sum up my presentation. So know your customer for digital services is still a big challenge. And it's important, and that we have seen that, has grown with COVID-19. Sharing of digital identities among different institutions is a promising way to cope with this challenge. There are different candidates that could be sources for identities, for example, insurance companies, telecommunication companies, basically any regulated company or company that does strong identity verification. We think financial institutions are very suitable because they maintain verified digital identities and also associate them with strong credentials. And a seamless integration between the identity provider and the relying party can be implemented with OpenID Connect for identity assurance as the representation for that metadata. And we believe that the FAPI-2 security profile is the right way to implement that with a suitable security level. And with that, I thank for your attention and open the floor for questions.